So, good afternoon. Welcome. It's our glorious Friday webinar, or at least it's a glorious Friday out there, and we're doing a webinar. So I hope it's glorious where you are. It's lovely, beautiful, sunny day here in East End of Pittsburgh. Cold, fresh, exciting to the blood. And hello, James. What indeed would my Fridays be without you? And thank you very much from Greensburg. I hope it's as nice and sunny and pleasant where you are. Hello, Marge from Brookline. Yeah, as I was saying, cold and fresh day, but it's lovely and signs of spring. My next door neighbor's crocuses are bursting through. Let us hope they are not over-optimistic and that another snowfall will come and destroy them. Hello, yes, Marge, I said hi. Hello. And David in the UK. Marlene. Yes, we're actually going to do a special on lighting in a few weeks' time. So I'm not going to talk too much. I'll be talking something about it today, but we're actually going to do a special in about 3 or 4 weeks' time on the later stage lighting and its history and what have you. I'm concentrating a little bit over the next few weeks about this technical side of theatre, and because there's a degree of interest in it out there, and theatre, like everything else, has history, and it's what we do has changed over the years, even though the fundamental is still the same. But I'll be talking about that in a minute. Dennis, hello there. And Grace, welcome back from Dublin. Yes, Barbara, it is the same here in Regent Square. Cold but sunny. But as I say, that's a nice, healthy way to be. Gets the blood stirring if you have the courage to go out into the cold and you don't wrap up too much. You want to let the air at you a little bit, keep you fresh. As I say, that's why I'm so young and vibrant, because I let the air at me. That and the red wine and the Jameson, but that's another matter. Yes, anybody out there wishes to sponsor a webinar, do let us know. marketing@pictheatre.org. We'll let you know all the details. It's frightfully easy to do and not overly expensive. And we only ask because, even though the webinars are free and will always be free, it does cost money to actually produce them. We have to put them up on the platform. We have to pay for that, various other expenses. So that's why we do ask if anybody wants to sponsor, but we will not charge money to watch them. Hello, John Henry. Welcome. All the way from Indiana, PA. And so as I say, sponsorship is always welcome. If you don't think you can manage a sponsorship, donations are also always welcome. As I keep on saying, every dollar counts. It's not so much how much you donate, but that you donate. And if you can afford a small amount once a month, it will make such a difference to us. So do consider it. A few dollars a month builds up over the year. So you don't have to write a big check. You can just make a few small ones. But we really do need your help at all times, but especially in these times of COVID. And I hope you're all well, and I hope you're getting your vaccines. I haven't got mine yet. I think it's an outrage. I think there is something seriously wrong with the world that I haven't yet been vaccinated. But we shall see. We shall hope. Hello, Randy. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. We love doing it. It's great fun. It's a lovely opportunity, I find. I talk to a few other friends of mine who run theatres, and it's seldom that the people who run the theatre get the opportunity to just chat away about theatre. We put on plays, but one of the good things that COVID has given us is this particular opportunity. We did it as a way of filling in, and now here we are doing it every week forever. And bringing new faces to you that you may not normally see. For instance, next week we'll be doing one of those things. Hello, Joke in the Netherlands, in Holland. Spring is coming. Well, it's coming a lot quicker where you are than it is where we are, but there are signs of it. I do love the spring. I love seeing the new shoots coming up and all of that. Makes you feel optimistic, just like fall makes you feel pessimistic. All those lovely colors of the autumn are just telling you winter is coming. That's Game of Thrones, isn't it? Good Lord. There I am, quoting television. Me, a theatre person. Anyway, how are we doing? Oh, we'll get started in a minute or two. Anybody else out there wanting to say hello yet? Shelley, hello. Glad you're here too. Wouldn't be the same without you. Thank you for being there. It is lovely when people say hello. You know, it's nice to see old friends and new friends. And I hope all of you friends of PICT are telling all your friends that they should be tuning in as well. Because the only way to find out what we're up to and what we're planning is to make contact with us. And we're already in the planning stages, by the way, for what's going to happen in the coming season, which will commence in the fall, which will be PICT's 25th anniversary season. So we've got some rather big plans for that. And hopefully by then, 90% of the country will have been vaccinated and all the fear will be gone. And we can all gather again together to do that special thing we do called making theatre. Hello, James. And Pat, welcome to you. We were just talking about it a little while ago and realized that in Pittsburgh, we were the last professional company to put on the last production on stage prior to the lockdown, which was our production of Midsummer Night's Dream. So that was the last professional full presentation that happened in Pittsburgh just prior to the lockdown, and just after the chaos come the autumn, we'll be one of the first to come back and with another Shakespeare. So we'll complete that little circle, one hopes, in the fall. Hello, Catherine. Glenshaw. Made it home from work in the nick of time. Your timing is exquisite, because I haven't begun, but I'm going to begin now. So this week we're going to talk about something I'm calling building the picture, and in a sense, that's exactly what it is. It's an artistic picture, a painting, a photograph, a movie, a TV show. You think of that when you think of the picture, but live theatre is also about building a picture. I'm going to begin with a quote from my hero, the person whose sort of philosophy about theatre has, because of my age, because of when I became part of theatre, his influence on the Royal Shakespeare Company and subsequently on most theatre, and particularly in Europe, in the UK, in Ireland, and to a large extent in America. He had an influence on theatre possibly as profound as the influence that Beckett had on writing, but his influence on direction and presentation was as important and possibly, as I say, as profound. And that was Peterbrooke. Peterbrooke was one of the triumvirate of directors who founded or converted the old Shakespeare Memorial Theatre in Stratford-on-Avon when it became the Royal Shakespeare Company. Peter Hall, Peterbrooke, and John Barton were these giants of theatre who made the shift into becoming the other national theatre of the United Kingdom. The Royal National Theatre being one, which was Olivier's theatre initially at the Old Vic and then on the South Bank. And in Stratford and in London, the Royal Shakespeare Company, concentrating primarily, though not exclusively, on the works of Shakespeare. But Peterbrooke was quite a remarkable thinker of theatre. And he really dedicated his life, in a way, to finding a kind of purity of expression whereby theatre was centered around its most important component. And he summed it up in the beginning. He wrote an exquisite little book. He's written several books, but this particular one, one of his, I think his first, he put the definition that started this process, or if you like, reverse the process back to its original form, which was what the Greeks adopted. And the quote at the start of the book, "I can take an empty space and call it a stage. A man walks across this empty space while someone else is watching him. And this is all I need for an act of theatre to be engaged." And that is exactly it. We must forgive the inherent and undeliberate sexist nature of that statement. You can also have a woman walking across an empty space. But the principle is that that is all that theatre is. A person standing in an empty space with someone watching. That's theatre. And once that person standing in the empty space opens their mouth and begins to tell a story, and the observer begins to listen, to observe, theatre is happening. That's it. If you strip it down to its absolutely rudimentary, basic form, that is an act of theatre. And that is all you need for an act of theatre. So that everything else that you add, costume, scenery, light, script, sound effects, music, whatever, is there to enhance if it is good, or to detract if it is bad, or to give you something else to look at if the actor is awful. But fundamentally, everything that you put onto the stage other than the empty space, the person performing, the person observing, everything else is extraneous. Your fundamental skeletal basis of theatre is in that simple comment. I'm going to read it again. I can take an empty space and call it a stage. Doesn't say what that empty space should be. A courtyard of an inn in Shakespeare's time and before. A school hall, a gymnasium, an ice rink, Othello on ice, an empty space, you put somebody into it. A man walks across this empty space while someone else is watching him. And that is all I need for an act of theatre to be engaged. And I love the way he says to be engaged, because that is it. It is the engagement between the audience and the performer that makes theatre. That is where theatre exists, in that engagement. Theatre doesn't exist by an actor acting. You can do that in a rehearsal room, and it's called a rehearsal. Somebody can be watching an actor acting, but it can be on a television screen or a movie screen. So that isn't an act of theatre. Theatre happens as a live reaction when somebody observes somebody else performing on an empty space in a direct engagement. That's theatre. So, where do we get from that? When you're planning a production for the stage, one of the earliest decisions that every director has to make is, what will it look like? What is the picture you're going to present? And the entire practice and purpose of scenic design is to offer the audience a picture that will aid and assist their understanding of the play, of the performance, of what the actor stroke actors are doing. And by the way, I always use the word actor in a non-sexual sense. I hate the word actress, just as I hate the word poetess, just as I hate the word artistess or painteress. They don't exist. We are actors, regardless of our sex. So just to clarify that in these days of correctness. So what we're doing is with design and helping the audience to understand better the play, the performance, and to give the actors as well, not just the audience, to give the actors a sense of place, the sense of place that they require in order to create the illusion of the play. Because actors also need that. They need that support mechanism. You can stand on a stage in an empty space and perform. And if you are, for instance, playing King Lear, you are probably standing alone in the middle of a huge empty space, conjuring up a storm. But you may also have sound effects that are going to help you. They're going to work with you to help build that illusion. And that's scenic design as well. So working together with lighting and costume and sound designers, the scenic designer and the director work together as a team, or should work together as a team, to offer the visual, the auditory sense of place and time on which the audience's imaginations can play. So we're not looking, in this sense, for building a reality or a pseudo-reality on the stage. We're looking to build a reality or pseudo-reality in the audience's imagination. We are providing an aid to the audience, not a solution. So let's start with an empty space and discuss the process by which we fill it. Now, here is a picture. It's actually from a production that we did, The Woman in Black, but it's a perfect example of an empty space. In fact, right in the middle of it, you see the sanctuary lamp of the performing arts, the ghost light. But I use that picture just to demonstrate that that is what we're talking about, an empty space. And I've literally, I suppose in a way I've just described to me what an act of theatre is, that relationship between the performer and the audience, that point of contact between the two. But even there, you can see a point of contact, because you're looking, without anybody telling you, you know you're looking at a stage, you're looking at a place of performance. And even though there's a few props lying around and a doorway, even the ghost light in the center pulls your attention, creates a point of focus. Even with a completely empty space, absent of any actor at all, you are already engaged in an act of theatre. And it is the thing that is prompted into your imagination is expectation that something will happen. Already an act of theatre is taking place. And that constitutes theatre. And that is true whether what will now take place, it could be anything from storytelling to My Fair Lady. Makes no difference. It's still that same process. So what do we do with the empty space? How do we work it? Now, I had a production, again, about 5 years ago. We did a production of Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris. And here you see a perfect example of the simple empty space. Now, the question that we had to address when we were presenting this, we had to start with the concept. Now, Jacques Brel as a show has been done for, I think, 50 years now in various places in various ways. Very often simply by 4 people sitting on high stools with microphones singing the songs. But we wanted to take it a special step further. We wanted to present it because each song, Jacques Brel was a genius songwriter, and every song he wrote told a story. So we made the conceptual decision that each of the 24 songs would be a one-act play. Not rewritten, nothing, just sing the songs, but using 4 artists working together in a space, each time to tell a particular story. The title of the show begins to lead your concept. Jacques Brel is Alive and Well and Living in Paris. Paris immediately brings our minds to the concept of café cabaret. And the idea of each song being a storytelling in itself. How do you stage them in a way that all of them will make sense, both within the concept as a whole and for each separate story by itself? And let the audience believe in what they're seeing. And so in order to do that, we created on this empty space with a couple of tables, 4 chairs, a hat stand, leaving the band way up at the back. As you can see, they were in a separate space. But the space itself that we provided allowed us to create the atmospheric of a cafe And yet, by the controlled use of lighting and by the discipline of the performance and the way you sing the song, not simply singing it generally to an audience, but most of the time singing it to another person, telling a story to another person within that space, suddenly you create not just a recital or a concert of songs, but a whole series of stories, one leading to the next, to the next, to the next. You are turning that empty space into the location that you want the audience to understand by the specificity of what you do at any moment in its own space. Now, that's a bit complex, but I'll follow through on that. Our job is to ensure the suspension of disbelief in the audience, and what they know they're looking at is a big empty space. We have to convince them, or rather convince their imaginations, that that space is not empty. When we did a production of Oliver Twist at PICT, we used another principle, that if you can have one empty space, you could have several. And Oliver Twist is, and we do an awful lot of adaptations, and I do a lot of adaptations, is a perfect example of the impossibility of putting a book on a stage. You can't do it. So what you've got to do when you're doing, and I've talked about adaptation before, you isolate moments that impinge so perfectly on the imagination that you can see the scene. And so many times when you read a book that you really love, you can see it. You can actually see it happening in front of you if it's so well written. So that's the principle of adaptation that we also use when we are attempting such a task as turning Oliver Twist from a book into a play. To do this, I, working with the designer, John Michael Bohack, we came with the conclusion of multiple spaces. I'll be coming back to this play later on in the webinar, but by so doing, it gave us the opportunity of creating multiple locations at the same time. Once we established the logic of a location, which would be, and here you see an example of two actors, each standing, well, one standing, one sitting, in different spaces, and each dominating their own space and creating a point of focus for the audience to interact with them. Once we tell the audience where they are and what they are doing, the audience will accept it and, as it were, fill in the gaps with their own imagination. So that concept of the empty space can be multiplied, but it can't be over-enhanced. You can only make a suggestion. If you look at the background there, the majority of this, well, yeah, pretty much the whole of this story, after Oliver has left the workhouse, takes place in London. So how do you remind the audience constantly that they're in London? Well, you have a skyline. And what is one of the most dominant and remembered features of London that isn't Big Ben, because it didn't exist when this story was happening, was the Cathedral of St. Paul's, designed by Christopher Wren after the Great Fire of London. So that great dome tells you we're in London. You never forget it. And that aside, no other dressings on the stage told you that. You had that one picture permanently in your mind. Every other platform that we used was used to describe a new location, a different location. If it was a tavern, a barrel, and a couple of chairs and some tankards, and that's all you require. Keep the space as empty as you can. And we followed that same principle pretty much a couple of years ago doing another of Dickens' impossible novels, The Old Curiosity Shop. And here was a story that took place in a multitude of locations. But again, working on the principle, as you can see in the picture to the left, of using just simple, empty, bare spaces, levels of platform. And each of those could take on its own identity, its own usage. So if you have a scene, and in the picture on the right, you have a scene when Quilp is chasing Little Nell, and he happens to come into a church or church meeting house. How do you create it? On one simple level, all you need is a man preaching at the top and a congregation looking at him, and you have a church. That's all you need. You don't need more than that, because once you hear the words of the preacher and you hear the mumblings of the congregation, you have created in an empty space that dynamic between the audience and the actors that tells you where you are and what is happening. That's all it requires. That you have someone walking across an empty space and someone watching, and that's all you require for an act of theatre to be engaged. And that's how that engagement happens. Now, you can have a sort of set of rubrics that guide you on this. And for many years in Dublin, excuse me, I have a bit of a chest. For many years in Dublin, I worked with a very brilliant designer who's Austrian from Salzburg called Bruno Schwengli. And Bruno spent most of his time working in opera. But he was, still is, a master of the school of theatre that I try to practice, which is minimalism. To use as little as possible. And that is the principle of Peterbrooke's basic dictum, an empty space. To put as little onto the stage as you can, but enough to ensure that the audience understand where they are and what is happening. And I did, I think, something like 30 productions with Bruno and created some remarkable work. I'll be coming to one of those in a little while. Most of these that I'm showing you aren't the work I did with Bruno. But we worked on a principle, and we eventually gave ourselves a guideline called What Are the 5 Things? Now, the 5 things doesn't mean you just only have 5 things on the stage. I mean, it can mean that, but in principle, it means what 5 elements, what are the maximum elements that you require? It should be 5. And what are those elements to absolutely clarify into the audience's mind where we are, what is happening, and why. If you need too many more than that, no, it can be 4, it can be 6, but if it's more than that, you're cluttering. Keep it pure, keep it simple. That was the guideline upon which we worked. The rule of 5 things. Now, a production that we did here at PICT, I'd already been in it, this particular play in Dublin, and I came here to direct it. In fact, it was the first play I ever directed for PICT, working with Gianni Downs, remarkable director now teaching in Pitt, was Oscar Wilde's play Salome. And there you see the design that we created for that. Here you have a wonderful example of pure minimalism, in that the script itself is a work of purity. It is a tone poem made into drama. The language is absolutely exquisite. The amount of color within the language is extraordinary. And it demands a kind of purity of presentation. So you ask yourself again, what are your 5 elements? What are they? Well, it is the story from the Bible. It is the story of Herod and Herodias, and the daughter of Herodias, who, by the way, is never named in the Bible. She's not called Salome. She's the daughter of Herodias. I think I mentioned before when we were talking about the play that the only time Salome is named is that she was one of the women on Calvary at the foot of the cross. But anyway, you have this basic biblical story of the execution of John the Baptist. So beautifully told. But it is told in the most decadent fashion. As I say, the richness, the color of the language, the decadence of the characters, and the absolute fanatic preaching of Yochanan, who is the Baptist. In contrast, you've got this roar, you are all going to go to hell, and God and the angel of death is coming. And at the other end of the scale, decadence and delight and purity and lust by Herod for Salome. So where do you demonstrate that? Well, you put it into a modern context. You put it into a context that the audience immediately recognize. It's a bit like if you dress everybody in appropriate period costumes of 2,000 years ago, nobody quite knows who anybody is because you don't recognize the clothes. So one of the best ways to deal with that is to bring it into a modern context, that your rich characters look modern rich and that your poor characters look modern poor. And that way the audience gets it straight away. Where are we? Well, we're in Israel. We are in Judea. We are. It's 2,000 years ago. What does that mean to us? Well, he's very rich. So where would he live? Well, it's on the Mediterranean. So let's give him a marble floored patio area. This is somewhere where they come out in the evening, in the cool of the evening, and look at the sky, and it's rich and it's simple, it's pure, because there's nothing quite so pure as marble. They sit on marble. There might be an impressive throne for the king, but that's all. And there is a pit in which Yochanan is living, is imprisoned. How do you create that? Well, you create it by putting a single square on the stage and saying, down there is where he lives, and when it's lit, it exists, and when it's not lit, it doesn't exist. So this is a classic case, a classic example of just using simple, pure images to delineate where we are and what is happening and who is who. You don't go beyond those 5 points. If you do, then you're starting to embellish and you are detracting from the essence of the play by giving too much to look at, not allowing the audience's imagination to fill in the gaps, which it will do if what you presented is pure and true. I can go on and on about this, and I've got a few more examples. Let's take, for instance, going back to Dickens again, and another piece that we did at Pitt. And here's an example. I'm going to come to the definition of this photograph, but the principle is exactly the same. We have an enormous book by Dickens in a multitude of locations. Again, there may be 30 locations within the book, because scene by scene by scene by scene, the character of Pip is moving around and growing from a small boy to a man in his early maturity, and all in the space of 2 hours, and all on one stage. So how do you tell this story? Now, this was an example of the need for a scenic design that was in itself active. It wasn't just static. But you do need certain points of reference. For instance, Pip is going from relative poverty to relative wealth. So your stage has got to demonstrate both of those elements, because the poverty that he moved from doesn't go away. The character of Joe Gargery and his family is always there, right to the end of the play, because Pip must come back to it. Pip's life in London is an almost constant throughout the second 2/3 of the play. So it must always be there. We must see those two things. There's 2 of your 5. Miss Havisham, who is the great dominating character of the play and the great misleading character of the play, must have a dominating factor too. But now you're starting to fill your stage up, because you're going to need it to tell a lot of other stories. So we ask ourselves, okay, what is the element? If we're looking for a third element, actually talking about the 5th element, aren't I? Anyway, if you're looking at the third element, what is the element that we most remember about Miss Havisham? And it is, of course, the table upon which her wedding breakfast and cake reside and have, and it is all rotting away and has been since the rejection, since the non-existent wedding. and that she herself is still in the wedding dress, and that nothing has changed. But that table isn't there all the time. Miss Havisham's house isn't there all the time. So it is an element that you can bring on and remove, on and off. But once you put that table on, you don't need anything else. You don't need pillars, you don't need candelabra, you don't need doors, you don't need carpet. All you need is that one table dressed as a rotting wedding breakfast, and you are in Miss Havisham's house. There is your element. And there are others. There is a sequence in the play when Pip goes to visit the home of the clerk to the lawyer, and discovers that the home to the clerk of the lawyer has been designed to look like a fort, so that his aged parent can enjoy himself there. How do you do that? How do you build? You don't suddenly build an entire fort on the stage, but you don't need it. All you need is a cutout indicating fortifications, a flagstaff with a flag on it, and a cannon, which you can bring on, take off. That's all you need. The audience will fill in the rest of it. So we created these simple things that could come on and off and on and off. But one of the most significant moments in the play is on the river, when Magwitch, the true benefactor, who provided Pip with his expectations, has to escape. And it is in the book an amazingly dramatic scene when they are rowing on the river and the boat comes upon them, and Magwitch's arch enemy is on the boat, and there's a thing, and then they drown and everything else. You cannot do the play without having a river. You cannot do the play without having a boat on the river. So what do? It is a fifth element. So you have to create a boat. But do you have to create a boat? No. What you have to do is tell the audience to create a boat. So if we put that up large, you can see, if you look carefully, that boat has the elements that you require for a boat. It has a back seat where Pip and Mr. Pip and Mr. Pocket can scull the boat with a big oar, and it has a front end in which Magwitch can threaten his enemy Compeyson. It doesn't have a middle. You don't need it. All you need is the sensation of the river, the sensation of fog, and the sensation of a boat. That is all you need for an act of theatre to be engaged in. The audience is looking at a person moving across an empty space, or in this case, three people on the skeleton of a boat in an empty space, and filling in the details for themselves. That is all that is required, because all that is truly required is the imagination of the audience. That play, which goes from Blacksmith's Forge to London lawyer's office, to rooms above an inn, to a made-up castle, to the River Thames, to a boat on the river. What will the audience believe? The audience will believe what you tell them honestly and simply. What they will not believe is over-elaboration. And if you look at photographs from the Edwardian theatre and late Victorian and the Edwardian theatre, and even into the early part of the 20th century, the desire to over-elaborate was so overwhelming that the need to suddenly break with it, to shatter it, was a dominating feature in the mind of young directors, such as Peterbrooke. And he brought it to bear in the Royal Shakespeare Company. I was blessed, even though I was very young, I did see it. And it was my first experience of the play King Lear. And Peterbrooke directed it with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and it was Paul Schofield. And I've never forgotten it. I almost remember every detail of it. But the one thing that was, aside from the fact that he used a young actor to play Lear, Schofield must have been in his 40s when he did it, if that. He used some of the finest actors available to him. The great Peggy Ashcroft, Diana Rigg, playing Cordelia. He also had nothing on the stage except that which he needed. So that a throne with a huge copper-colored backing to it would tip over and become a table. Nothing else. It was the first truly minimalist production that the Royal Shakespeare did. And it was incredibly brave, because at the time, that was not how you did Shakespeare. But it revolutionized, it changed the way people thought. And out of that came his entire philosophy that he worked on for his entire life. The problem, as I mentioned, in terms of multi-scene, I'm going to give you another example of, and this is the one that I worked on with the aforementioned Bruno Schwengler, and this was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And what you're looking at here was from the Gate Theatre in Dublin when we presented it. And again, the trouble with Pride and Prejudice, one of the most popular books in the history of the world. It's always either coming first, second, or third in most popular books. I think Lord of the Rings is still, we're excluding the Bible and the Quran and the rest of them. But the problem with Pride and Prejudice, again, is that it is multi-locational. How do you turn a multi-locational book into a single, perfect stage setting? And our solution here, and again, we followed the rule, with no more than 5 elements, 5 things. We knew that the book takes place in Georgian houses, some relatively small, some relatively grand. We knew that the book takes place both indoors and outdoors. And we knew that the scenes were relatively short and required a lot of scene changing. Now, the one thing that bores an audience beyond belief is watching a scene change, unless it is beautifully choreographed. I pride myself on the ability to choreograph a scene change fairly well. But here you'll see the elements. Obviously, the costumes, which were exquisite, they were all handmade for that production. They were very, very pretty. But you will also notice something interesting. The backdrop. One of the great fashions of the Georgian period was not to put wallpaper up, but to paint murals. That entire rooms would be painted, the walls, with a mural of a landscape. And so we created walls that were actually a light gauze on a curve and painted the mural of a landscape onto it. We carpeted the floor completely green. That allowed us to be both indoors and outdoors at the same time. If there was no furniture, we were outdoors. And behind that gauze at the back, we had other trees. Or they were painted white, because the pillar just to the left of your screen was also white. It appears green because of the light that was put on it. Just to the other side, it's not in this photograph, is another pillar, but it's not a pillar, it's actually a tree. When we're indoors, that tree becomes a pillar. When we're outdoors, that pillar becomes a tree. It's in the audience's imagination, and if we stay true to that principle, the audience accepts it. All the interiors, we had 7 chairs, all different. There was no pair or set of chairs. Each chair was different, but they were all painted the same color. And by the way, the upholstery was unique across all the furniture. It was actually the decoration on the upholstery was the handwriting of Jane Austen, just as a point of fact. And we had 3 tables, and we had 1 outdoor bench. And that was it. So that to create a location, we just moved the furniture. We just moved the chairs. And we moved the chairs not in any strict order of, well, we're in this location, we must have the chairs here. We moved the chairs to where the actors needed them. And we let the actors describe what the location was, which was very clear within the narrative of the text. So here you are using a classic example again of the minimum amount of material to create the optimum amount of effect in the place that it matters most, the imagination of the audience. And in that production and in many others that he and I did together, we stuck to that principle of no more than 5 elements. Sometimes in a scene, no more than 5 things. But the principle of that rule of 5 always seems to work if you get the 5 things right. If the 5 things are doing their job to play through to the imagination of the audience. Now, the most minimalist play, I mentioned at the beginning that Peterbrooke did for directing and staging as significant and remarkable thing as Beckett did for writing. Let's go to one of the most minimalist play scenic descriptions ever written. That was Beckett's Waiting for Godot. At the beginning, here we are with the wonderful Jim Fitzgerald and Marty Giles. And also Jim Fitzgerald and the Moon. I'm not sure which is the most eternal, but anyway. When you open the script of Waiting for Godot, Beckett tells you exactly where you are. A country road, a tree, a rock. It is the most non-specific stage location possibly ever written. On the basis Shakespeare never tells you where you are. Any country road, any tree, any rock. It's the image, not the reality, that counts. Now, in that particular production, which we did at PICT, I designed it, and the tree was a sort of cactus, but not a sort of cactus. When we did the Gates production, which is the one you can find on film, when we filmed it, it was a real tree on in a rocky place. When we did it on stage, the tree was literally a cutout in plywood of a trunk and 2 branches sticking out from it. The rock is just a rock. There are no other rocks around it, because Beckett doesn't say a rocky place. He says a rock. And a country road, he doesn't say which country. He doesn't say what kind of country road. He says a country road, a tree, a rock. So when you're approaching it as a producer, as a director, or as an actor, or as a designer, Beckett has done 3 elements: a country road, a tree, and a rock. There's another element he brings into it, because there are 4 characters in the play, and he makes a very specific statement. All 4 wear bowlers. That's the actual direction. All 4 wear bowlers. He doesn't tell you what they're wearing, anything else about their costumes. He tells you nothing about the nature of their characters, their origins. It's all in the text. The actor has the total freedom. I always maintain, playing Pozzo, that Pozzo was as much of a tramp as the other 2, and that everything he says is a lie, because all he wants to do is impress people, and most people usually impress others by lying. But that's an interpretative choice. But all 4 wear bowlers. Any other choice is yours. But Beckett is trying to the minimum of definition, the minimum of expression of location. Let the interaction between the actor and the audience fill in the rest. Let the act of theater fill in the rest. The guidelines for the audience are simply a country road, a tree, a rock. All 4 wear bowlers. You don't need much. I mean, for instance, we did Romeo and Juliet without a balcony. Nowhere in the script does it say there's a balcony. In the script, what Shakespeare writes is Juliet enters above. Now, probably because we know the form of the Globe Theatre, she was on that balustrade that was above the main acting area. And remember, Shakespeare's stage in the Globe was fundamentally an empty space, which is what Brooke was trying to get back towards. But you can do Romeo and Juliet without a balcony. The only thing that she needs to be is above. When we did it at PICT, she was about 2 feet above him on a slightly higher level empty space. but it meant that they could make contact, which made the scene much more. I always like to think of it not so much as the balcony scene, but the kissing scene, because that's what they want to do because they're teenagers and they've just met. And that's the reality of it. But by providing just that simple definition of above, you are fulfilling the indication of the script and allowing the actors to do the work. Midsummer Night's Dream. Talking of trees, Midsummer Night's Dream takes place in a palace, in the accommodation of some working men, and in the woods. So how do you deal with that? Well, we dealt with that by following as strictly as we could the principle of the empty space. All we had was a big wide platform, and the only other scenery were 4 columns of thin gauze, muslin. And that, with lighting and with the acting, with the performance, with the interpretation, could be anywhere. It can be the palace of the Duke. It can be the forest. It can be fairy, the land, the world of fairy. It can be the rehearsal room for the rude mechanicals. It can be anywhere, provided that we, as the actors, are playing the moments that the text demands, and in that relationship with the audience, and that we are accepting the location of where we are, the audience will accept it too. And I think that design for Midsummer Night's Dream is an extremely good example of how little you need and how much you can achieve if what you've got is precise and not confusing, not overburdened, not overladen. You make a simple statement and you keep it pure, and the audience will fill in those gaps. And they're helped by the actors, they're helped by the lighting, but the elements there were an empty space, 4 columns of muslin, and everything else was white. In fact, everything was white. We took it to an extreme that everything that went on that stage in terms of costume, furniture, everything was white. There were shades of white. The rustics were slightly more beige, and the world of fairy was slightly more blue, and the world of the aristocracy was just a simple white. But that's your elements. There they are. All the costumes, all the props, even the toy dog, even Peter Quincy's eyeglasses they were white. Let the audience fill in whatever else they require. This was another example of that. I've got a few more to show you, and I'm running out of time because I'm talking too much as usual. I want to move on to a play. We're back to trees again. Trees seem to be everywhere. This was a play we did by local writer Lissa Brennan back in 2015, For the Tree to Drop. The essential aspect of this play was that there was a tree with a body hanging from it. And his sister, it was a slave who'd been hung, and his sister, sent in the Civil War, is digging a hole underneath it for his body to drop into. The one thing that is not on that set is the tree. And in fact, the character who's hanging from it is right in the front center of the picture, because Henry, as Lissa puts in the script, who is dead, we are seeing his spirit, as it were. He is taking us through the story. But you've got the story of 5 people in this situation. The dead man, who is narrating, his sister, who is digging a hole, the owner, the plantation owner, who is letting her do it because he's a cruel person, his wife, who is isolated and lonely, and one of the kitchen slaves, who is her friend. 5 characters. You also need 5 locations, and you need to tell the story. So one of the elements we used, as you see, we've got an empty space split into levels. So you have a deck with a rocker on it. That tells you you're outside a plantation house. The wife, who is isolated, she sits on a chair, and you put the light, the image of a window in front of her, just using light and shadow. For the kitchen slave, you have a stool. For the sister, you have a hole to dig. And you have an imaginary tree. But you add, because the tree is imaginary, you can add a fifth element, which is the projections at the back, which can show very precise images of what they're talking about, but just in single image, not moving, not movies, not film, just simple images of things moving. A stretched rope tells you someone's hanging. You don't need to see a body. You don't need to see where it's from. It's that simple image. So there again was a classic example of how we use 5 elements, 5 elements, 5 elements, nothing more. Let the actors act, let the audience listen, let the audience engage, and give them only enough for the imagination to be stimulated to fill in the gaps. Educating Rita, which looks ostensibly like a normal full set. We got the image of it there. Educating Rita, two-hander play. This was, again, we did a lot in 2015, didn't we? This is one of, I modestly say this is one of my designs, but again, the elements of what is it? Where does this take place? It takes place in the room of a university professor. A rather messy university professor. So what are the elements? How do you come to create the space that tells the audience where you are without asking too many questions, so that they can spend their time watching the actors act? What defines that room? Books, a desk, his chair, a student's chair, and a rather tired old carpet on the floor. And if you've ever been into a professor's room in an English or Irish university, you'll see the tired, especially in Trinity College, you'll see tired old rugs on the floor that have probably been there for 5 generations. But you're telling the story of the room the moment the audience look at it. There is only one wall on that set, the back wall, and most of it is bookcases. That's where I got the idea from. The principle is those simple elements, those 5 elements. When you look at that set, you should be looking at something, and it should be giving you the immediate sensation of, well, this is somebody's office. This is somebody who deals with books. This is somebody who has guests because there's a big comfortable chair for them. And this is somewhere that has not been cleaned and tidied for a long time. Look at the state of that rug. We actually began this design on the principle that we happened to have the rug, and that was the first thing that we began with. We've got a rug. That's going to be the set. What else can we put around it? And that's what I mean by starting with that minimum thought. What else do I need? Not else would I want. What would I like? But what do I need? And on that principle, going back to my time spent with Bruno, we very often would start a discussion by looking for all the things that we could possibly put into a set, and then taking away everything we didn't need until we got down to the basic 5 elements that we did need. So you can work it from both ends. I began that with a rug. We've started plays with so much scenery and so many props, brought it back down again. Whichever way direction you come at it, it is trying to find the minimum requirement to create the optimum effect. Come back to Oliver Twist again, a different view of that same set. And as you can see, we're looking at it from a much higher level. I want to I'm just using it to demonstrate to you how those platforms worked. The interlocking of the platforms became separate rooms, could become a road going uphill or downhill. They could be anything you wanted them to be, depending on what you put on them. Here, for instance, is the scene where Oliver is brought up to the magistrate. All we needed to create what do you need to create a magistrate's court? Somewhere for the magistrate to stand and a desk for him to hammer, and you've got it. Everybody else simply stands there and does their bit. But the magistrate's court is created by one single piece of furniture. Nothing else is needed. That's how you create location. If you've got London streets, you'll notice hanging above him, because we're also going into the London streets, an awful lot of painted signs, fishmongers, butchers, lawyers, haberdashers. We actually were rather naughty there because we put up names from other characters in other Dickens novels. But that's all you need. You create a street of shops by putting up hanging shop signs. It's as simple as that. More is unnecessary. More is confusing. The purer, the simpler, the better. So I want to come now. My final picture is of a set which we did originally at the Gate Theatre, and we reproduced here in Dublin. It was a thing that Bruno and I designed together, in fact. And it was for one of my most successful adaptations, I am blessed to say, and that was for Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. And here is an example of how little you need. Now, if we bring that up close, you can see that it is ultimately an empty space. Almost the entire stage is an empty floor. There is a wall to the left, a wall to the right, some pieces of furniture. The window is not a window, it is all windows. The door is not a door, it is all doors that we require within that production. The floor is not the interior, just the interior floor of any room, it is the interior floor of every room. It is also the exterior ground upon which they walk in the countryside. The table and chair in the corner are just not a chair and table in the corner, but they function in any situation that we may be in. And they can even become, it can be Rochester's armchair, it can be Jane's bedroom, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand that it is a chair, a place, a location that we define by what the actors are doing. It isn't an entity in itself. It is a contributory entity to the scene. There was another table, which is where old Jane is writing her memoir, but it also becomes the dining table of the Rivers family. What the acting does, what the text does, what the engagement of theatre between the observer and the performer does is define what anything else on that stage is. That stage is simply an empty stage, an empty space, a palette, if you like, upon which we add the colors of the performance. And to aid those colors, we'll take those simple elements that we require, just those elements that we require, to embellish and to define. If you like, it is, you're taking an empty space and you're drawing a picture around it, and or drawing a line around it and saying, within this, your imagination can now work. That's the ultimate purpose of it. And especially when you're doing adaptations, it's incredibly powerful, or indeed Shakespeare, or anything that audiences have an alternative awareness of. Because once the audience believe that they're seeing what they know from their memory of the story, they will fill in the gaps. Just look. And as I said with adaptation, the rule that I learned from the writer Hugh Leonard years ago: read the book, throw the book away, write a play, because you will write the things that you remember clearest and most vividly. And that is also true, because if you tell an audience in simple terms what they're looking at, they will fill in the gaps from their own memory of similar experience. They will accept it. They will willingly suspend their disbelief. And that's basically that. My goodness me, we're full out of time. Have we any questions out there? Yes, we do. Hello, Dennis. Yes, there you are. There's an example in Jane Eyre. When Jane Eyre is walking up a staircase, all she has to do is put her hand on it. It's not there, but if the banister is in her head, it's in your head. And because you know she's walking up a staircase, you know there must be a banister. So you will see it if she defines it. And the same is true of so many other aspects of minimalist staging. You define it because you know it's there. Whether you can see it or not, it's there in the head. Anything else out there at the moment? If not, you can always, as I will always answer questions that you send to me at the moment. Anyway, that's it for this week. So next week, I'm going to follow up on this topic for a couple of weeks. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the evolution of the stage. For those who know about it, it might be interesting. For those who don't know about it, I hope it will be interesting. But I want to look at the way the stage has evolved and the different uses of it, and how something that has been constant for 2,500 years has also consistently changed for 2,500 years. So that's next week's topic. And the week after that, I'm going to talk about one aspect of staging I haven't mentioned today. And to us as actors, it's one of the most wonderful empty spaces. Audiences might find it slightly different, but designers find it very challenging. Back in 2016, was it 2016, we did a full season using an alley stage. And I had one designer who designed all five shows for that stage. And so in 2 weeks' time, John Michael Bohak and myself are going to be discussing the approach to the designing of a season of alley stage presentations that we did back in 2016. So that's it for this week. We got another question. I have a greatest setup for a play in which the setting was so significant that it may have required more than minimal description. Yes. This very often happens when you're dealing with early 20th century drama, for instance. I mean, when I did a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, which is late 19th century, with Bruno, that was so minimalist, it was quite amazing. I could discuss that one at length, I won't. But when you're dealing with writers like Noel Coward, Terence Rattigan, what have you, the demands there tend to be much more cinematic, if you like. The need for realism tends to be stronger. But I've even there managed to get it down to a relative minimum by trying to keep the elements as few as possible. But certainly, yes, there are areas where you do have to have a greater complexity than I would like as a confirmed minimalist. But on that level, you know, if push comes to shove, I'll drink scotch if I have to. I'm an Irish whiskey drinker. But anyway, yeah, the answer is yes, because nothing is ever perfect in this world. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Grace. And I will see you all next week, and we're going to talk about the evolution of the stage. Thank you for being with me. As I always say, remember to donate if you can. It matters. Go to the website. It's terribly easy. If you can sponsor a program, we'd be delighted. We'll send you the information. In the meantime, get your vaccine if you can. Wear your mask. Wash your hands. And for heaven's sake, take care of yourselves. See you next week. Bye.